Welcome to the Junior Jobs Podcast, where we give new software engineers actionable job search advice relevant to today's job market. In today's developer interview, I'm talking with Miks Silis, a recently hired junior software engineer who was recently also let go, where we talk about what he wished he knew in his first role. So, Mix, what were some of the things you weren't expecting in that first role?
Um, I think one of the big things, especially coming from, you know, working on your personal projects, and that's really all you're doing, is just the sheer amount of like other people's code that you have to dig through. And um, you're so kind of like used to when you're building something for yourself, you kind of, you build it from the ground up. So you have an idea of how kind of everything works because you've made it versus coming into like projects that are, several months old to several years old and, you know, having to fix bugs, having to figure out like where the bugs are and just like digging through, like a ton of different stuff just to kind of narrow it down to figure out what's going on. I think that was kind of like one of the big things. And that's something that I guess like I feel like I've definitely, like, improved it now, having had just and it's not it doesn't like really take that long to kind of get a lot better on it because 'cause you're just doing so much of it every day, like, that's kind of, like, all you're looking at. Um, so, yeah, it's just, like, the amount of reading versus, like, the amount of writing, and you think that starting out, it's like, "Okay, well, I'm just gonna be, like, coding stuff and, like, it's gonna just be this whole thing," and it's like, no, it's it's trying to, pulling repositories, like, figuring out basically like what the heck was written, a year ago, 6 months ago. And like, if the people are still at the company, like talking to them about what was going on. And if they're not, then trying to kind of, figure out from what the code's doing exactly like where the issues
And
are.
I used to be the developer that would, as I was fixing bugs and fixing up old code bases, would be the ones that was complaining about how stupid these old developers were.
Yeah.
But once you start coding for, a few years, I've been at my current company for 3 years, and I realized, 80% of the bugs that are in the code base are actually me, a year ago, 2 years ago, and I'm having to fix my own stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but as you're talking about getting more comfortable at reading other people's code, that is one of the reasons why it's often recommended that you engage in open source projects. There already is an established code base of users. There's already kind of a
Yeah.
ready backlog of work. They need help, and you get that extra level of comfort in working on something that you haven't built, especially since if you're starting something from
Yeah.
scratch, you're probably using the latest frameworks and libraries and things. Heck, that is not the case in industry. Yes, some projects and some
Yeah.
teams stay up to date with the latest versions of XYZ framework, what have you. But there's still always going to be a substantial amount of legacy code that you're going to have to be able to read through and understand. And
Yeah.
that's part of the job description. If you need help finding your first job in tech, make sure to check out David Roberts' video series called Standing Out in Tech, which covers every aspect of the junior developer job search and includes checklists for your resume and LinkedIn to make sure you stand out from the pack. He's a former recruiter and software engineer himself, so you know you can trust his stuff. And to sweeten the deal, if you enter the code JuniorJobs30 at checkout, one word, you'll get 30% off. So, how did you get more comfortable and
Yeah.
get better at reading other people's code so you can be successful?
I think I kind of I made a point to in our Slack channels, we would just have like whenever pull requests came up that needed review, everybody kind of get notified. I just kind of made a point to start going into those. And even though I wasn't kind of like doing, I'm not going to be approving anybody's code just yet, but just to see what people's comments were, what other people were writing, and kind of like what the resolutions to the comments were. So that was kind of really interesting to see what some of the more senior guys are like picking up on in other people's code that are also more experienced than me. I mean, obviously, I get my own reviews from people, and then that was the kind of like one side of it, but that's like just what I'm putting out there. So, yeah, just to kind of because I had this access, to the company code base, like anything that other people working on, like especially like back end stuff that I didn't really have to deal with. Like, well, what is this weird, they're generating keys for like licenses. Like, what does this actually look like? Like, what are they talking about? So, I think, yeah, just kind of consuming what I could, when I could, like when it would just come up, like, oh, I'm just going to take a peek. and see what they're doing and see what's going on. And that I think was really helpful just to have, I mean, it was all basically, it's just JavaScript, but different thing, different, I guess they're using like different technology and whatever, but so
Sure,
that's
sure.
something it
I mean,
did.
the common term that's used is, best practices. And coming out of a boot camp, you're self-taught,
Yeah.
you're reading the latest and greatest best practices of your chosen language or framework. Well, the reality is, in my mind, they're not really best practices. They're really just common practices, or maybe recommended practices.
Yeah.
But after me doing this for 12 years now, I've worked on enough projects with enough combinations of different languages and frameworks. Pretty much every company does things a little bit differently. And it's typically a
Yeah.
combination of, yes, the best practices that are used in the industry, but then there's usually some sort of compromise among the team members themselves. So it's not my style of code that I write at work. I write like our company's style of code because that's kind of like our agreed upon
Yeah. Yeah.
practices, which differs from the code that I write on my own, where I can be as nitpicky, as anal as I want about all the,
Yeah.
the nitty gritties. Because no, I don't have to negotiate with somebody else for what it's supposed to look like. Okay, so you mentioned the
Yeah.
amount that you're going to be reading other people's code. What else was kind of a surprise for you when you landed in that first role?
I think this is like just another kind of byproduct of being, a self-taught person. I mean, I did do boot camp, but it just kind of basically rehashed a lot of the stuff that I already learned. Um, and you come into like a position like, oh, I'm a whatever stack, like I've learned the Merge stack or I've done, Angular, and that's kind of like my set of things that I know. But the just a wide range of like technologies that companies use to even get one project up and running is like so huge. Um, I mean, just having to deal with databases that you're not familiar with, like we were running stuff in Docker sometimes, and then other times like I have have like 5 projects up and running with like PM2 and like using like Redis servers and stuff like that. That you know for personal projects, like yeah, it's you're not running a licensed service and you're not running like 5 different other projects to kind of like, authenticate users and whatever. It's just like, oh, here's my page that I made. So it's just kind of getting to grips with lots of different stuff, um, content management systems that maybe you're not familiar with, and just lots of reading documentation. So that was
Yeah, yeah.
kind of a thing that it's like you can kind of prepare, but there's just so much of it out there that, yeah, you're not going to be able to cover everything that every single company is like
Yeah,
using.
you don't wanna define yourself too much or limit yourself rather by that stack that you
Yeah.
learned, in your boot camp. Just to tell a little story about some of my own failures as a junior developer, when I first started out, I was so afraid of failure, I only picked up the tickets from the backlog that were within my, scope of expertise.
Mm.
And that really limited
Yeah.
me, in the long run. Because as a junior, it's safe to ask the stupid questions, so you should feel safe grabbing all
Yeah.
of the extra tickets that, like, you have no idea how to do, because you will have somebody watching over you. But for me, when I was, mid or
Yeah.
senior level, all of a sudden I was at a point where, I can't really ask the stupid questions anymore because 'cause they're paying me a lot of money. And you don't really necessarily have the level of
Yeah.
support that you had when you were younger in your career. So, at least for me, and, I'm sure other juniors are this way, out of fear, you think that, "Oh, I'm just gonna grab what I know and do my task and, not, ruffle any feathers." But
Yeah.
really, it's the opposite. You gotta be very vocal, very noisy, and engage in lots of different,
Yeah.
parts of the project that maybe you aren't familiar with if you wanna be successful.
Exactly.
So as you're looking back now, so you are now on round 2 of your job search. Apologies for, how things worked out at
Yeah.
your company. But now that you
Yeah.
kind of know
Yeah.
what the day to day looks like and you're going in for round 2, how are you approaching what you learned on the job? How are you approaching the job search, using that context that you now have?
I, I don't know if I guess that's a really good question. I don't know if in terms of job searching, I'm actually maybe I'm doing some things differently. I'm trying to be more specific about where I'm applying, or maybe kind of taking more time like in applications. But I think the bigger change is kind of like the mindset, and just what I'm able to talk about, with companies and with like recruiters. And um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, just having it seems silly because it's similar kind of like projects that I was working on. You because you have this like, I guess, maybe added credibility of somebody else hired you and
Hmm. Hmm.
somebody else might hire you too. Um, that, yeah, it's just kind of like I'm maybe more confident in just talking about what I'm done, what I can do, what I have figured out in just like a short amount of time. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that,
Yeah, I think that there's
I
something
don't
I
know if
want
that's a
to
good
kind of
explanation,
tack onto that, if that's all right, if I'm understanding you correctly. But I want to focus on that
yeah,
confidence piece. Now, a lot of developers, when they're going in for that first job, they don't have any previous work experience. So when it comes to negotiating the right salary or whatever compensation package, you kind of don't know what levers you can pull. You really don't have
yeah,
any leverage in that conversation. But what I will suggest, and it's something I've been advocating a lot on LinkedIn lately, is to build that confidence is to start doing freelance work when you're looking for that first job. Now, when I
yeah,
say freelance, that can mean a lot of different things. I'm not saying if you can, I mean, sure, go ahead and get a 6-figure contract doing some work for a large company. But
right,
what I'm really saying is build a project that helps somebody that's not you, a friend, a family member, a small business. Even go look on Fiverr and Upwork. You're not going to make a lot of money there, but you're going to practice working on a solution that's not
yeah,
your own. So you're going to have some difficult stakeholders you're going to have to manage. uh, you know, Timelines and
yeah,
expectations that aren't yours that you're going to have to work with. And the whole idea behind it, one, yes, is getting experience, but the other part of it is gaining confidence in yourself. Because it's so easy just to be endlessly iterating on a personal project in your free time in the
yeah,
evenings
yeah,
alone. Does that build confidence? I don't know. I would argue it doesn't necessarily build confidence because you still don't know yet what real software development looks like.
yeah.
So that's what you can now
I guess
take to the next
it
one.
kind of depends on, yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, something when that I was doing, I had a very specific personal project that I was working on, like during my first job search, and I still kind of continued on with it. But it was something that, and I know a lot of people talk about this too, you build something that kind of like is exciting for you or that you're really interested in. Um, and that might not, yeah, it doesn't kind of like give you the same kind of, uh, I don't know, street cred, like a company, but just have something that you're excited to talk about, and that's, I mean, it's just like it's something that I personally use right now, because I have it deployed for, I guess, my use. But, yeah, having something that you're like, you know, I guess like maybe like a problem that you have that you solved for yourself. And
Mhm.
it's something that during the job search, you're excited to work on to kind of keep your mind a little bit in check because it can get, you know, a very stressful.
Yeah, you don't want to undervalue the importance of fun, I would say. For all the talk about grit and hard
Yeah.
work and just push through and stick to it and sacrifice to learn to code, for example, it's so much easier when you
Yeah.
actually like what you're doing. When I was first learning to
Yeah.
code, I would stay up late, I would code on the weekends, I would take my laptop on vacation. By an outsider's perspective, I was, quote unquote, working hard. I wasn't working at all. I
Yeah.
was I was just goofing off and having fun.
Yeah.
But the end result was the
I
same.
know what you mean.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
going back to that first role that you had and kind of understanding how things were a little bit different than you expected. Is there anything you wish you had done or you had practiced more or studied more before you got that job that you think would have help prepare you more for that first role?
Um, I, I, I think, because there's just such a variety of, things that you could be doing, you don't actually fully know what it's going to be like until you show up there, for work. And The I mean, I actually, before I started, I emailed like the tech lead and I was like, "Is there anything I should be looking at? Like, should I just kind of get ready for, whatever?" He's like, "We don't actually expect you to do anything before we start paying you. So no, but you'll be okay. You just show up and then we'll, we'll kind of like sort it out," which was, I was like, okay. And I think, something, well, I was mentioning like in, when we first started, the whole start asking like people questions on day one. And I think going into like my next role, that's definitely something that I'm going to kind of take into there. And I think in my first like one-to-one, my manager was like, we knew your skill set when we hired you. We know exactly like what you can do and what you can't do. And ask for what you need and like really kind of like, put yourself out there. And if you need help, like ask for help. And I think as a kind of, junior showing up to a job and like a first job, um, you are kind of like, oh, well, okay, they hired me, but maybe they made a mistake and they think that I know something that I don't know. And, they knew what they were, like they knew what they were getting and it's like totally fine. And like, you were saying, like, that's kind of like your time to ask the dumb questions, just whatever is not working, ask for help and, talk to people about what they're doing, talk to people what they're working on. I think that's something I would try to kind of like put myself more out into the team
Sure.
and kind of like, get those conversations going
Sure.
earlier.
Because at the end of the day, they want you to succeed. The company didn't hire you
Yeah.
hoping that you would fail in the project, or your boss didn't give you that task hoping that you would
Yeah.
fail. They all want you to succeed. You're all on the same team here.
Yeah.
And yes, they expect you to not know anything. Even coming in at my current job after, a decade of experience, I still had a lot of questions because every tech stack is different. Every team culture
Yeah.
is different. The processes are different. And you kind of have to make yourself heard and known, especially as a junior. If you're onboarding in a remote
Yeah.
environment, you can put one question on your Microsoft Teams or your Slack, and it might take, an hour to respond, maybe more. You got to be aggressive.
Yeah.
You got to make yourself heard and known
Yeah.
for sure. Anything else that you think, looking back on, that you wish you had known earlier in either your job search or your career, that you think could have positioned you to be in a better spot now?
Um, I, s- I mean, people talk about be comfortable with not knowing. And that's, yeah, you're not going to know everything. You're not going to know kind of like most of the things that you, you're doing maybe, but your like kind of value is in your ability to figure it out and look for information and kind of like pull resources together to get done whatever kind of like task you're working on. And I am now, I think, just even like, working on my own stuff or doing take homes for like applications. I'm, if I'm working with something that I'm not familiar with, I'm not kind of like in this mindset, like, oh no, like I don't know this thing. It's like, okay, well, this is something I haven't used. So let me look this stuff up and how does this work and what's going on here. So it's kind of maybe switch things a little bit, in my head. I don't know.
Well, yeah,
Like,
there's initial
you
panic
know,
mode whenever you hit a problem that you've never encountered before. Like, oh shoot, I don't know what I'm going to do.
yeah,
But the great thing about software engineering is that somebody has encountered the problem that you're seeing before. You're never the first one. Unless you're,
yeah,
inventing some new rocket ship or medical device or, what have you.
yeah,
Typically, we're not, reinventing solutions here. It's just like, a website, just a mobile app. It's just people have encountered these problems
yeah,
before. So just know that probably people dumber than you have figured it out. So you could probably figure it out too.
yeah,
Well, this was a great conversation. Really
yeah,
appreciate you coming on, Mix. That's all the time we have for today, but hopefully that helps the
yeah.
people
Thank
that are
you.
listening really kind of understand, what to expect in that first role. Well, have a great night, and thank you to everybody that's
Yeah,
listening.
thanks so
We'll
much.
see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Junior Jobs Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe, as that helps us reach more developers in need. And don't forget to check the show notes for details on today's sponsor and other job search services that we provide.